Hello and welcome to Optima's March EPL Bite-Sized Learning, Managers, Supervisors, and the Employee Handbook. Jennifer Shaw is with us today from Shaw Law Group. And welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you, Millie. How are you today?
I'm very good, thanks. How are you?
I'm well, thank you very much.
Okay, so I hope that most of you are familiar with Jennifer by now, but if not, she is the founder of the Shaw Law Group and has created an amazing team of professionals with a vast wealth of employment law knowledge. I encourage you to go to shawlawgroup.com and learn all about her and her team. And I am Millie Mastromati with Optima Healthcare Insurance Services. Let's go ahead and get started. Jennifer, let's just lay a groundwork about the employee handbook. Can you tell us a little bit about it, focusing on what it is and what it isn't?
Absolutely, Millie. Handbooks are actually a great tool. And I think a lot of employers don't spend enough time preparing the handbook and using the handbook. They sort of cross it off their list, put it on a shelf, and don't really give much thought to it. But the purpose of a handbook, of course, is to set rules and parameters for your employees. So, what time are your offices open? How are people supposed to take rest breaks and meal periods? What do you do if you feel like you've been harassed at work? What's the complaint process? There are a number of rules, not only in California but elsewhere, about what needs to be included in an employee handbook. So there's a temptation sometimes, I think, to just download something quick from the internet and say, okay, I crossed it off my list, my handbook is done. But what people don't understand is your handbook is going to be one of the first things that lawyers are going to ask to see when they want to sue you. It's a document that you could be deposed about if you're in a deposition in an actual lawsuit. So your handbook has to be accurate. It has to reflect your actual practices and your actual sort of feel as an organization. So I think it's important you use colors, for example, that are a representative of your logo, that you have a little welcome statement from the CEO or the president or the executive director. Make it a tailored document for you. And then, of course, you've got to update it. And this is something that drives people crazy. They ask me all the time, well, Jen, how often do we need to update our handbook? Well, at least annually, because no matter where you're doing business, you're going to have changes at least annually that need to be reflected in that handbook. So I tell clients, look, get it on your calendar for November. Make sure you reflect all the new laws, distribute it the first week of December when everybody's back. And then if you have changes to make during the year, you can make them in that document. If it's, for example, available on an intranet, you can send emails to people letting them know if there's been an update. And then you just redistribute the handbook again the next January. Obviously, getting a sign off is important. You want to have an acknowledgement. A lot of us, of course, are doing things electronically, Millie, so you don't have to actually send a hard copy, but you do need to have even an electronic acknowledgement that the person got the handbook, they understand they're supposed to read it and comply with it. So in short, handbooks are very important, and I think they get sort of low billing, if you will, in terms of ranking of value of importance, and they really should be a lot higher on the list.
Okay, so if I were a manager or supervisor, I would want to know that handbook inside and out. So how often should managers and supervisors review the employee handbook, and how should managers and supervisors, or no, the question is, like, should they review it with a different lens than an employee would?
Yes, they absolutely should. And Millie, the other question you were asking about how often is important too, because I think managers and supervisors need to go to that handbook every time there's a question that they're not 100% sure of the answer to. So here's something that's just crazy. I have a law firm. I wrote our handbook. And somebody asked me a few months ago, how much PTO do we get? Well, lawyers have unlimited time off. As long as you bill your hours, you can do whatever you want. Same with our firm administrator. But our non-exempt folks, they have 3 weeks of PTO. I don't know what got into me, but I said, 4 weeks. Like, I just thought it was 4 weeks. I think it's because I think they probably deserve 4 weeks. And then the person brought the handbook back to me and said, "Oh, Jen, it says it's only 3 weeks." I said, "Oh, okay. So it's 3 weeks, but I'll change it next year." The bottom line is, I shouldn't have said anything until I looked at that handbook. So I want managers and supervisors to look at the handbook from the perspective of, what do you need to know as a leader? And what issues should you be looking out for with your team? But also, what are you held accountable to? Does your handbook say that you're going to give evaluations every year? Well, then guess what? You better do it. You want your employees to meet their deadlines, you've got to meet your deadline, right? So not only do you need to, I think, really look at it from the lens of, what am I supposed to be holding my folks accountable to, and what am I held accountable to? But also, you just got to know it cold. You got to know what's there, and you should have it very accessible to you so you can look it up and make sure you know what you're supposed to be doing anytime a situation comes up, particularly with tricky things like leaves of absence, equal employment opportunity issues, somebody claims harassment or discrimination. You're going to want to look at that handbook to know exactly what you should be doing.
Okay. Okay, so I am a rule follower, arguably to a fault. I have to frequently remind myself to consider valid exceptions sometimes. So because there are differences in managers, supervisors, and employees, they all have their unique dispositions and inclinations for adhering to the rules. Do employee handbooks lend themselves to different managerial and employee styles? And how can managers and supervisors navigate those differences and still adhere to the handbook?
Such a good question, Millie. Here's the bottom line. I think a lot of people put too much in a handbook. So, I mean, I've been sent handbooks that are 100 pages long. I don't care what your business is, you don't need a handbook that's much more than 30 pages. If it's more than 30 pages, there's stuff in there that doesn't belong there. There is room for interpretation when you're talking about communication style, when you're talking about these sort of soft skills that we have. What should be in the handbook, though, are more of the hard things. When do you have to take a rest break? When do you have to have a meal period? When do you get paid overtime if you're non-exempt? Where do you go if you have an internal complaint? When's your paycheck going to come? What holidays do you get? What notice do you have to give to take vacation or PTO? Those kinds of rules really shouldn't be subject to discretion. Those are the things that you want to hold folks accountable to, that don't matter if you're the manager, Millie, or I'm the manager. So I tell folks, look at your handbook from the lens of, what are you trying to hold people accountable to? And if there's a lot of subjectivity, it probably needs to come out, because most of the things in the handbook are not intended to be subjective. Short of the sort of welcome statement that I recommend you have at the beginning of a handbook, there's really nothing that should be subjective. Now, there will be some things that will be subject to discretion. For example, somebody runs out of FMLA leave, they need additional time off. Well, the manager or supervisor and HR are going to work together to decide if that's appropriate and how much time should be given. So it's not that there's not discretion, but most of the things in that handbook are going to be pretty well defined, and they should be.
Okay. All right. Well, one of the things that you said in that I've heard you say in the past, though, that I just kind of want to highlight for people, because I do actually listen to what you say in the past, is that it is the consistency to which you apply things. I mean, to make sure that you're, if your best friend is one, that kind of thing. Do you have any comments about that?
Yes, and Millie, it's so important. I tell people all the time, every employee should be treated as if they are your favorite employee. Now, some of you are sitting there saying, well, I don't have favorites. I don't believe you. We all have people who we like more or less than others. Okay. And I know we all think that we can be perfectly objective and that we would never show that. But if you're not on top of it, your real feelings are not that far from the surface. So you've got to be consistent. And I want you to treat every employee as if they are your favorite, your very best employee. I love Millie, so I'm going to be tempted to give Millie an exception to some rules that I might not give to Walter, who, by the way, is the name of my plumber right now, who, you know, if murder were legal, there might be some action I'd want to take. So I can tell you right now that between Walter and Millie's going to get a lot more stuff out of me than Walter ever will. But if I'm going to be an effective leader and manager, and I'm going to keep my organization out of legal trouble, I've got to treat him the same. So if I'm willing to do something for Millie, as much as I'm going to choke on it, I've got to do the same thing for Walter.
Okay.
And it's just that simple. That is how we avoid these legal claims. So that when somebody says, well, you didn't like Walter, did you? No, I didn't, but I treated him just the way I did Millie. And you're not going to be able to find an example where I didn't.
And that's one of the challenges of being a manager or supervisor.
It's hard.
And you know, yeah, it's not human nature. So.
Oh, and it's not for the faint of heart, right? You know, people say to me all the time, like my daughter said to me the other day, Mama, when I work, I just want to go straight to being president. I want to be president of the company. I don't want to be someone who has to work up to that. I'm like, well, that's just very interesting. I think that's your father speaking, but okay. You only get to be president by hard work, right? You don't get to walk in and just do it. And it was really interesting to me because it shows me a little bit about her personality, which is, well, being a rule follower isn't her favorite thing. She told me her favorite class at school is this class called Practical Arts, where you get to make whatever you want. You sew it, you weld it, you build it with clay, you do whatever you want. She doesn't like regimented things. Well, when you're a manager or supervisor, you're in the world of regimented things. And if that's not your cup of tea, I get it. You're going to have to work harder. It doesn't mean you can't do it. For most of us, being an effective manager or supervisor, it's not second nature. It's not something we know. When our firm changed 5 years ago, my former business partner retired, or he calls it semi-retirement. I had to start running the firm, and it's a different ball of wax. Let me tell you right now, so many things I have to do different as a manager or supervisor that I did as an individual contributor. And I wasn't that good at it in the beginning. And believe me, I've still got a long way to go. So, you know, I feel that anxiety when people say to me, it's really hard being a manager or supervisor. And I actually want to give them a hug and say, yeah, you know what? I hear you. It really is. But if this is where we are, let's embrace it. Let's get it done. I mean, that's sort of how I felt when Greg left the firm was, all right, he's leaving. I love my job. I love my firm. We got to figure this out. We got to put one foot in front of another and get it done. And that's what we do as managers and supervisors. I don't care if we're talking about employee handbooks or we're talking about, you know, promotional interviews where you thought somebody would do really well. They end up doing terribly. You got to promote someone you don't want to promote. It just is what it is. And for most of us, I think we do the job because even with those kinds of frustrations, we get a lot out of it, right? And so there's that push and pull. It's not always going to be perfect the way we want it to be.
Right, the whole yin yang thing,
It's a
and
yin
you know,
yang.
so you know, but that's good. That's good for managers and supervisors to hear that, you know, that there's always something to learn, and that the employee handbook is a great tool, like you said at the beginning, and to know it well. And if you have any questions, go to your manager, supervisor, go to, you know, before you answer employees' questions.
Well, Millie, let's just talk about that for 1 second. The ability to say to yourself, I do not know, I am not sure, I need to check with someone, in my mind, is a critical element of success as a manager or supervisor. If you can't do that, we're going to have a problem.
Right. And wouldn't you much rather as an employee hear, I don't know, than get the wrong answer and then, you know, make decisions based on that. So, okay. Well, thank you very much. That, I think, does it for this month. Appreciate your time, Jennifer. And
Millie, thank you so much. I love doing this. Thanks to all of you listeners as well.
Right. I thank you all too. Bye, everyone.
Bye.